If you're just getting your food, you can continue to get your food, but I'm going to go on and start the presentation. I want to welcome you to the presentation on Mexico. My name is Jan Graham, and I've had the pleasure of traveling in Mexico, and it is truly a pleasure to introduce you to this beautiful city of Mexico. We called this, we being Ryan Cox and me, we are the people who are presenting today on Mexico. We call this an excursion to Mexico, because between the two of us, we've probably been to around 20 to 25 spots in Mexico. So we had to kind of narrow down where we could take you today, and we've done that. But we're going to take a quick excursion to Mexico together. This is an image that Ryan took from the plane as he was flying into Mexico City. And if you go to Mexico, when you talk about Mexico City, you usually just call it Mexico. It's a pretty understood that that is the city. And it's a federal district, kind of like our DC. Mexico is the third largest city in the world. And so it's a huge city spread out over a lot of miles. And so when you fly in, it looks like this. I flew in at the night, and it was incredible, the amount of lights and how long those lights went on as we were descending into Mexico City. Mexico is a beautiful city, and it is really a wide range of environments in this country, in the country of Mexico. We have the east and western Sierra Madre mountains that run through the country of Mexico, as well as the Pacific coast and the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a beautiful and very diverse country. There's jungles, there's rainforests, it's all kinds of beautiful areas. You can see here some of the places that I have been in Mexico, and you can see how much diversity there is with these images. Ryan and I sat down and we decided to list all the places we had been when we went to Mexico. And there's still tons of places that both of us would like to visit. But you can see that there's a lot of places we've been. And look at the diversity here. We have lakes, rivers, ruins, cathedrals and churches that would match any in the European countries, color, excitement. It's a vibrant country. You would love it if you went there for sure. Where is Mexico? In case some of you don't know, Mexico is south of us, and it borders the United States. It is also bordering to the south, Belize and Guatemala. And as you can see, what a beautiful place for a country to be situated on the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast. No wonder so many people go to Mexico. And Mexico is the 8th most visited country in the world. And it is considered part of North America. My friend and colleague just told me to remind you. Mexico is divided into 31 states, where we have 50. Mexico has 31. And then the federal district, which is the city of Mexico, or Mexico City. The flag, I think most of you have seen these colors that represent Mexico. So I decided it might be a good idea to show you an image of the flag of Mexico and tell you a little bit about why they have the colors they have. The Mexican Revolution occurred in the early 1800s, and after that, this flag was what they flew for their independence. The red stands for the bloodshed during the revolution, the white for purity, and the green for hope. Ryan said that he would mention later what you see in the middle of this flag, but what you cannot see maybe very well is that there's an eagle standing on a cactus eating a snake. And that is based on an Aztec myth from the ancient Aztec civilization that was located around where Mexico City is now located in Mexico. Mexico, a lot of people think that they've been to Mexico when they have been to the border of Mexico, and they've been to Tijuana. And Tijuana is on the state of Baja California. But I would say that that's probably not a true look at Mexico. The border towns are heavily populated. Some of them have become very dangerous. There's a lot of crossing across the border and back and forth. But if you've been to Tijuana, you've probably not seen exactly a good look at Mexico. Mexico also goes all the way to the tip bottom of the country, to Cancun and Cozumel, which is Quintana Roo state. a lot of people say, well, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Cancun. And a friend once said, that's like saying you can ride a bike, but you can only ride it with training wheels. Going to Cancun is not exactly experiencing what the country Mexico actually has to offer. Cancun was actually designed by the Mexican government as a tourist spot. It's located in a jungle, a pretty dense jungle down in the Mayan part of the country. And they actually put a water system in and then brought in the hotels, and now it's probably one of the most popular destinations in Mexico. But it is not exactly going to Mexico. It's not quite the same. Although there is a city there that has some of the flavor, it's really just a tourist place. Have any of you ever been to Cancun? Ah, a few of you have been there. Do you remember it? No, I'm kidding. When I went to Mexico, one of the places that I went was Mayland. And Mayland is on the Pacific coast. And it is not a city like Cancun in that it was developed just for tourism, but it has become a very popular destination for tourism. Mayland has it all, really. It has the beautiful coastline, it has the architecture, it has the history and the flavor, and it's got a lot of people who actually call Mayland their home. As you can see here, it's on the coast, and it has this beautiful Pacific coastline with the rocks coming out of the ocean. It's really a sight to see. It's also got a malecón, and a malecón is a big walkway that stretches along the coast. And this malecón is a very vibrant, active place in Mayland where people are skating and running and walking and getting out into the beautiful, I mean, it's a beautiful climate. It's a perfect place to exercise and that kind of thing. Over here you see a picture. It's kind of small, and I'm sorry about that, but you see a picture that looks like a very small man on top of a rock over here. That is a man getting ready to dive into the ocean in Mayland. And these divers dive 2 or 3 times a day for money. They go around and collect from the crowd after they've done it. But they have to time their dive perfectly or they will fall on the rocks or hit the bottom. So they're watching the patterns of the ocean before they dive, and that was really quite an interesting thing to see them diving into the ocean. Here's another really good picture of Mayland and the malecón, where you can walk along and really experience the coastal part of the city. The inner city is one that's a very typical city of Mexico, with the church and the central area where people actually spend a lot of time outside with family and friends, music, food. It's not really like the United States. People don't sit inside at night and watch TV. It's more outside and being with family and friends and music and food. One last thing I wanted to say about Mayland, and I probably sound like a tour guide, but if you ever get a chance to go, there's probably no more beautiful sunsets than anywhere in the world, because it's on the Pacific coast and it's pretty much unobstructed sunsets on the malecón, and they're just beautiful. Another place that I went when I went, and you can tell I hit more of the tourist areas. That's why I'm going to let Ryan tell you more about the history of Mexico. But another place that I went was Puerto Vallarta, and that's in the state of Jalisco. And this is another place that really was not designed for tourism, but is a natural spot for people who want to go experience Mexico, but also experience the coastline. And as you can see, once again, the malecón, which is kind of like a boardwalk, where people can stroll and spend their time outside, and it's on the coast. And once again, beautiful sunsets. And you can see behind me in this picture here how Puerto Vallarta has built up. You can see the high-rise hotels in the background, and that's really good where they put these, because the city itself has been unaffected by the high-rises, but you can still get into the city in a really cheap and quick bus ride or taxi ride into the city of Puerto Vallarta. And you'll also see, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a cruise ship. So a lot of cruise ships are now stopping in this part of Mexico as well. But as you can see, there's still plenty of people who live in this city and are not just coming here for tourism. It's a vibrant city, as you can see by the traffic, but it's also a beautiful spot for tourists to come and experience the flavor, the true flavor of Mexico. Some people say, why go to Mexico? And I started thinking, why does one choose Mexico? There's plenty of beautiful places in the world to go. One reason is that many people appreciate the indigenous Indian ruins that we still see in Mexico and have been uncovered. For example, down in the Yucatan, where we have the Mayan civilization. The Mayan civilization, I think best guesses, is 6,000 BC. And so this is an ancient civilization, and I think, and Ryan may correct me here, I'm not really sure, but I think we're still constantly uncovering more ruins in the Mayan Empire. I think that probably only about 10% have been uncovered. It's amazing when you go because you see, you can look down and it's all vegetation, and underneath there is a civilization waiting to be uncovered. So it's a very interesting place to go. This is Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, some more of the remnants of the Mayan Empire. And then there's Tulum, which is in the Yucatan. And when I went to Belize in Guatemala, we went into the area on the southern part of Mexico, into Tulum, and saw the ruins there. Those ruins aren't quite as impressive. I suspect it's because they're on the coast and they've not weathered as well. As you can see, they're not quite as they're not still in really good shape, like you see with the Chichen Itza, for example. And over there to the left, I just stuck this little picture in because while we were in Tulum, we were able to see some dancers who actually, they wear costumes that are indigenous of the southern part of Mexico, and they actually do aerial type dancing hung by their feet and legs on this big pole. And it was pretty incredible what they were able to do. And that little picture just doesn't do it justice. I was in this part of Mexico a long, long time ago, before digital cameras and the beautiful things I probably could have captured. So that was not a really great picture, but it was amazing to see. One other place that I went to when I went to Mexico was Guanajuato, and that is in the central part of Mexico, about a 3-hour bus drive or ride from Mexico City. And this is called the Cradle of Independence because during the Mexican Revolution of the early 1800s, this is where most of the action took place. As you can see, San Miguel is a charming city. It still has the old and the new. You can see here the cobblestone streets, the facade of the old buildings from the 1500s and on. And you can also see that San Miguel is a colorful city. One thing that really strikes me when I go to Mexico is the color. It's an amazingly, they'll use pinks and oranges and blues and greens, and it's just beautiful. And a lot of the facades in the buildings look very European. If you've ever been to Spain, very similar, of course, because of the Spanish conquest. Some of the city of San Miguel is located in the mountains. So you can see in the distance there the church that is the center of San Miguel. And I wanted to mention that church because this is a pseudo-Gothic church that was actually built, I think it was 1888, and the architect of this church had only seen pictures and postcards of Gothic buildings in Europe, and he drew an image in the dirt and had it built. It's the most amazing church you'll probably ever have the pleasure to go into. And this is just the bell tower of that church. This church is very famous in the state of Guanajuato because it has presidents and bishops and other priests buried in the tombs underneath. And the only day that these tombs are opened is November 2nd, which is the Day of the Dead. So here you can see a really good picture of the old versus the new in San Miguel. The man with his goods on a donkey, and in the background, the taxi. So you still see the old versus the new, and that's another reason that Mexico is such an exciting city to visit. One other place that I went was Dolores Hidalgo, and this is the, Hidalgo was the priest that kind of led the revolution, led the Mexican Revolution in the early 1800s. And so this city is actually named after him. And here is, of course, the church that's always located in the center of every Mexican town is usually the church. 89% of people in Mexico are Roman Catholic. So usually the Catholic Church is in the center of town. And here's the statues of Dolores Hidalgo. Now, that's just about all I have to say. No, I think I'll mention that I went to the capital city of Guanajuato as well, because I don't want to shut up. You know me, I can talk all day. And here's an image of that city, and that city is huge and beautiful and located in the mountains as well. I wanted to show you just a few images. If you go to Mexico, much of the life of the family happens on the roof because many of the structures are flat. So you'll have a terrace up there or a patio, and you can grow flowers and vegetables, and the flowers and vegetables and fruits are fantastic in the city of Mexico. I wanted to mention the Virgin Guadalupe because she is the patron saint of Mexico. I would say that she's the dark-skinned Virgin Mary. And the story goes that this peasant named Juan kept seeing this image of the Virgin Guadalupe, and he went to the priest and told the priest that he was seeing her, and the priest did not believe it and said, "Prove it." So he went up to the mountain where he had seen this apparition of the Virgin Guadalupe and told her that he needed proof that he was seeing her. And the Virgin pointed, it was in December now, pointed to a rose bush that was in full bloom and said, "That will be your proof because does a rose bloom in December?" So he took the petals from the roses and put them in his apron or his cape or poncho and took them to the priest, and when he released the rose petals, there was an apparition of the Virgin Guadalupe on his apparel. So the priest believed it. So Virgin Guadalupe has now been the patron saint of Mexico for years since. When you go to Mexico, expect to see parades. Parades everywhere. Parades for saints. Almost every day of the church calendar is a day of some saint. And so you will see parades with, they'll be carrying the saint down the street, and there'll be music and laughter, etc. One place I went to when I was in Guanajuato is the Cristo Rey, which means Christ King or Christ the King. It's a huge structure on the side of a mountain right outside of the city. And you can see, do you see the doors down at the bottom? Let's see, where's my little thing? You see those doors down at the bottom? That's how huge this statue is, because that's where the people would go in. And when you go in that dome, you will see a big, you'll see a crown of thorns and a golden crown for Christ. And when I was there, people would go up those steps on their knees in repentance and penitence for blessings from Christ. So when you go to Mexico, go to shop, because shopping it's a paradise for shopping. You see we have some things here. I've probably got 40 more things in my home. Mexicans love to haggle about price. Don't pay what it says. Offer, and they will come back. And sometimes they will chase you down the street to try to get you to buy their particular wares. So be careful. If you make an offer, they're going to really try to sell it to you. When we were in Guanajuato, we also went to a tile factory and bought pottery, and some of that's here. My sister's still mad at me because we visited a tile factory in Dolores Hidalgo, and tiles were 3 cents a piece, and there was thousands, and I would only let her take 10 because we had to carry these for the rest of the trip. So she still blames me that she only got 10 tiles, but some of my tiles are here. The pottery is beautiful as well. Like I said, the flowers, the fruits, the marketplace, the outdoor markets. You can see ladies here selling their tortillas and their fruits and their tamales. Make it a wonderful place. Do go to Mexico to eat, because the food is is plentiful and cheap and delicious. And today you had a really good sampling of mole, which has from 20 to 30 spices in it, and we appreciate Rhea making it for us because I know you'll agree it's delicious. So I really will shut up now and let Ryan tell you a little bit more about Mexico and focus on 3 parts of Mexico. This is Ryan Cox, and Ryan has traveled in South America, Central America, Mexico, and he's fluent in Spanish, and he's actually lived, I think, in Venezuela. And he is a student here now, but next June, he and his family are planning to move to Mexico to live in the Lake Chapala area. So I'm going to let him tell you about Mexico City and the pyramids and a little bit more about the state of Guanajuato.
Hello, how are you doing today? Well, the summer of 2009, my brother and I, that's him right there, Aaron, we went to Mexico and spent a good month and a half there, traveling the country, going coast to coast. And I'm going to talk more about the city of Guanajuato. If you ever get the chance to go to Mexico, make sure you go to Guanajuato. Guanajuato is an old colonial jewel, probably one of the most beautiful, in my opinion, the most beautiful city in the entire country. It's very medieval looking. It's got a very old world feel. It's almost like being in Europe, being in Spain, possibly. And it's right in the center of the country. Maybe it took us 5 hours by bus from Mexico City. Now there's a panorama of the city of Guanajuato. You got the yellow-orange cathedral right in the center of town. You have the university, that big giant white structure. And as you can see how colorful the way they paint the buildings of all different bright colors. And then right here on the right, you can see a garden. It's called the El Jardín Unión, the Union Garden. It's the main plaza in town. Now this is the hotel we stayed at. We stayed at several. This is just one of the ones that we stayed in Guanajuato. It's really simple, very affordable, maybe $10 a night. Now, if you look at the statue right here, right above the city, they have a statue called El Pipila statue. And it's a statue of a revolutionary hero, of a guy that his nickname is El Pipila. During the time of the Spanish Revolution, the War of Independence, there was a priest named Hidalgo, like Mrs. Graham was talking about. He was preaching out of the pulpit against the Spanish. And he started his movement of revolution in the city of Hidalgo, just a few hours away from the city of Guanajuato. And when his troops came to the city of Guanajuato, this simple miner, his nickname El Pipila, he strapped a concrete board, bricks to his chest area, and he walked into where the Spanish were all barricaded in a fort called the Alhóndiga, and he set the place on fire. And of course he escaped, he was protected by the concrete slab tied to his chest. And at the feet of the statue, he says, the war is not over. There are yet still more Alhóndigas or Spanish forts that need to be burned, is what it says at the bottom. And this is just, scenes of the city of Guanajuato. This is a beautiful garden plaza right here. It's way up, the city is way up in the mountains. It's very, very, very hilly city. The streets are all very, very steep and winding that go up and down the mountain slopes. Now this is a, Now this is a famous balcony, or an alleyway. It's called the Kissing Alley. And it has a story of, it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet story. There was a young, rich, aristocratic girl named Ana, and she was in love with a young miner guy. He was a miner. His name was Carlos, and he was renting an apartment across from her balcony. And of course, they fell in love. They would reach across the balcony and kiss, and one day the father of Ana discovered them kissing, and he, of course, prohibited them to continue the relationship. He threatened her, if I ever see you kissing this poor miner guy again, I will kill you. And, well, of course, she doesn't listen to him, and he put a dagger to her heart, is what the legend says. And now it's like you have good luck in relationships if you kiss on the balcony, is what the legend says today. And that's the balcony, as you can tell how close the two buildings are, the two homes. And here's the opposite view of the balcony from the street. And as you can tell how narrow, most of the above streets are very pedestrian friendly. Very few cars can drive up and down the streets of Guanajuato. Here's a picture of the cathedral again. Now here's like an old Spanish fort-like structure up on the side of the mountain overlooking the city of Guanajuato. More views. Here's the interior of the cathedral. It's a very beautiful building, as you can tell. And here's a castle. I mean, if you want to see castles and you can't afford to go to Europe, go to Mexico, go to Guanajuato. As you can tell, it's a very beautiful city. See, here's some of the beautiful homes of the upper class people they would build with the gardens flowing out into the streets. Now here's a view of the city again, a panorama taken from that giant statue called El Pipila statue. And the city even has its own theater or opera house. It's called Juarez, El Teatro Juarez. And this is it. At night, when you walk around the city, all the buildings are all lit up like this, you can tell. And here's the cathedral all lit up, and it's very neat just to wander the streets at night. Now below the city, since there not much traffic can get through the streets, they used to have these underground rivers, and they drained the rivers maybe, I think in the 1960s, 1950s, and they built roads. And here you can go down the steps, all throughout the street, all throughout the city, and they have access to the underground. And that's where most of the traffic flows under the city through these canals. And as you can see here, here's traffic under the city. And more views of the city of Guanajuato. And here's another picture of Guanajuato, and I believe that's the castle, one of the Santa Cecilia's castle, they call it. Now, the city of Guanajuato, one of its most famous things would be the Mummy Museum. The city has about 101 mummies, is what they say, and they're mummies taken from a cemetery back in the mid-1800s. Due to overcrowding in the cemeteries, the government officials decided it would be a good idea to tax the burial plots. And if a family was unable to pay the tax every year, of course they would have to exhume the bodies. And they started exhuming bodies, and they found that many of the bodies were perfectly preserved. And most of these bodies date back from the late mid-1800s, as you can see. And the one on the right is purported to be the smallest mummy in the world, is what they say. And here is another view of our hotel. This is above on the roof of the hotel. They call it the terrace, the terraza. And here's more streets, views of the streets of Guanajuato. You can see how everything's made out of stone. It looks like Europe. You feel like you're in Europe when you're in Guanajuato. Okay, now we're going to go to Mexico City. As Mrs. Grand pointed out, Mexico City, they call it DF or DF, which is the federal district. The city is not in any state. It's kind of like Washington, D.C., which is a city all to its own. Here's views of this city of Mexico City. Now this is a map of the city of Teotihuacan. Mexico City is built on the city of Teotihuacan. When the conquistador, Hernan Cortés, when he arrived in Mexico City to conquer Mexico City, this is what he saw. This is the Aztec capital. The Aztec capital, they called it Tenochtitlan. And as you can tell, it's kind of like Venice. You see the canals, we would have boats and rafts floating up and down the streets. It's all waterway. The city was built on an artificial island, and they extended the island. And it was pretty much, it was a watery city. They had the giant causeways going to the mainland. And when the Spanish built Mexico City, they had to drain that giant lake. I believe the lake is called Lake Texcoco, and they ended up draining the lake to build the city of Mexico City. According to legend, if you guys have ever heard of the legend of Quetzalcoatl, I believe he's the sun god or the serpent god of the Aztec religion. According to legend, he was a white man or a light-skinned man with a long flowing beard. He came traveling from the east, possibly from Europe or Africa, and he came on a boat of serpents, is what the legend says. And when he arrived in Mexico, he civilized the local population of Mexico. He taught them agriculture, architecture, and many other things, and he ruled for a short time, and then he went back to the east on a ship, and he promised to return one day. Well, when the local Mexicans, the indigenous population, heard about Hernan Cortez, they viewed him as a god. They thought he was possibly the long god Quetzalcoatl returning. Now this is modern Mexico City right here. And this is the statue of the Angel of Independence. Like New York City's got its Statue of Liberty, Mexico City has its statue of the Angel of Independence right here. It's one of the most famous pictures of all of Mexico City. And here's a neighborhood in Mexico City. You can see how the streets look. You can tell this is in July, and you can see most people are dressed up in jackets. Mexico City is not really a warm city at all. It's at an altitude of 7,121 feet. It's higher than Mount Mitchell. So as you can tell, it's quite cold. Most of the days, the temperature gets up in the 60s. And it rains always about the same time. About 6 o'clock at night, you can always expect to get a little rain shower for about an hour. Now this is a typical hotel, one of the hotels we stayed in. This is the main lobby right here. And here's like a cafe where you can sit down and drink coffee, order sandwiches. More pictures of one of our hotel rooms. Now down here on the bottom, this is the Metropolitan Cathedral of Mexico City. And it's one of the oldest churches in the entire New World. And it's also, I believe it's the largest. And we got to take a tour of the bell tower up on top, walking around. You can see the views of the entire city of Mexico City. And they told us the history of the Metropolitan Cathedral. So as you can see, we're walking around on the actual roof part of it. And here's the inside of the cathedral. Now, outside of the cathedral, to the right of it, there are these ruins of the greater temple of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. It's like one of the only ruins left of the Aztec Empire. And you can actually go to it and see it. It's pretty much in ruins. There's not much to see. I mean, you can tell, it's ruins. But it's right in the heart of right downtown Mexico City, and it's called the Templo Mayor, the greater temple of the Aztecs. And here's the famous Garibaldi or the Mariachi Plaza. If you have a party, there's a birthday, you go to this plaza and you find some mariachis to come sing at your party. And that's where you would hire them, out of this plaza right here. Of course, here's another picture of the Angel of Independence right here. And Mexico City's got a park, kind of like New York has its Central Park. Mexico City's got the park of Chapultepec. And right on top of there's a giant hill, and there's a castle built up, they call it a castle, and it's built up on top of the hill overlooking the city of Mexico City. And it's right in the heart of the Chapultepec Park. And that's the entrance to the park right here. And here's pictures of Mexico City again. And here's some of the fountains of Mexico City. Now this is the park again, the Chapultepec Park. That's my brother Aaron. And here's some of the... There's an anthropology museum in Mexico City, and it's one of the greatest museums in the world. And these are replicas of Mayan ruins that's right outside the museum you can view. They're not the original ruins, they're just replicas. And here's inside of the museum, I believe a mammoth skeleton. And here's some of the wall paintings up from the Mayan Indians that are on the walls of the pyramids. This is inside the museum. And this is I was telling you about Quetzalcoatl. This is the serpent god That's a representation of Quetzalcoatl, the snake. And here is the Chapultepec Castle. This is Mexico is the only city in the Americas that actually had an emperor rule out of it. When Napoleon conquered Spain, Napoleon also conquered Mexico because Mexico was part of Spain, or was a part of the Spanish Empire. And Napoleon sent a Habsburg emperor from Austria, and he sent it to Mexico to rule Mexico, and his name was Maximiliano. And Maximiliano had this castle built for him to rule Mexico. He wasn't the emperor long, though. He quickly, within a year or two, he was overthrown and, of course, put to death. But this is the famous carriage that he rode from the beach when he got off at the port. He rode that to Mexico City. And here's stained glass windows in the castle. Now, when you're up at the castle, you can look down and see Mexico City. This is Mexico City. This is the famous Reforma Avenue right there. That's one of the most famous sites of all of Mexico City. As you can see, it's all tree-lined. Mexico City is a beautiful city to visit. And it's very modern, lots of skyscrapers. Now we're going to go to the ruins of Teotihuacan. It's one of the largest pyramid complexes in the world. The pyramid, there's two main pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun is on par with the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's not quite as tall, but it is wider, but it's in similar size to the Pyramid of Egypt. But the cooler thing is, you actually get to walk on top, climb the steps. You can't do that in Egypt. And this avenue right here, as you can see, this is the Avenue of the Dead, the archaeologists have named. And at the other end would be the smaller pyramid called the Pyramid of the Moon. This city right here, no one really knows who the people that lived in the city were called. We call them Teotihuacanos, but that's not really correct. The Aztecs is actually, we got the name of the city of Teotihuacan from the Aztecs, and it means the place of the gods. Even the Aztecs didn't even know who these people were that built this city. It was already in ruin by the time the Aztecs got to power. And it's a very modern city for the time. It was one of the largest in the world, is what archaeologists have been able to deduce. And the Indians, a lot of them actually, there was apartment complexes where the native people would live in actual apartment complexes. And I believe this is a view of that palace. More pictures of Teotihuacan. And as you walk up to it, you have all these vendors selling stuff to the tourists. You can buy lots of crafts and stuff. Here's more views of Teotihuacan. Now this is the Mayan city of Palenque. It's in the south. I believe it's in the state of Chiapas. And it's probably the most spectacular of all the Mayan cities. It's set in the dense jungle. It takes a long, long time to get there. I think it took us, we started in a city called Oaxaca, and it took us like 13 hours by bus. We took an overnight bus to get to this city. It's very, very remote. And the city is famous because it's kind of like Tutankhamun. Now I'm speaking and thinking of Spanish, and I got to remember the Egyptian name. There's a king figure like Tutankhamun there. He's called Pakal the Great, and his tomb was unearthed. It was pretty a big deal because there's not many rulers of the Mayans or the Aztecs that was ever uncovered. They found his royal tomb, and he was buried with a mask of jade covering his mask and necklaces, and he was one of the greatest kings of the city of Palenque. Now this is another city right here. This is of a group of people called the Zapotec people. This is the city of Monte Alban. It's in the state of Oaxaca. And most people have never heard of the Zapotecs or even knew, that there was an empire, the Zapotec Empire. But this is their capital. This is right in the center. You can tell they believe it was like where the priests would look at the stars from this building right here, an observatory. And all around it, this is the main square, and all around it there are pyramids. Here's more views of Monte Alban. And so, you have to forgive me, some of the pictures are out of order. Now, this is Palenque again. This is the tomb of the inscription. Right in this tomb right here is where the great king Pakal the Great was buried. And they found his burial tomb. Archaeologists, I forget what date it was, but it wasn't really that long ago. And now here, from the steps of that pyramid, you can view the whole city of Palenque. They say only about 5% of the city has been uncovered. Most of the city is still buried in the jungle. And here is the royal throne. Oh, the bathroom in the palace. You know, this is the bathroom that the king, Pakal the Great, would actually used. And here's just a church outside of the city of Teotihuacan. And I thought it was a pretty church, so I took a picture of it, but that will conclude my trip to Mexico. Yeah, I should have asked, does anybody have any questions or any comments or? Yeah, well, there's somebody that has a question back there.
How long is your thing? I mean, how long can you put down there? What's that expect?
Well, we were in Mexico for 42 days. So there's a lot to see, a lot of places to visit, and Mexico is a pretty big country. Not as big as the U.S., but much bigger than any country in Europe, just about, except for Russia. So, I mean, you're going to do a lot of traveling. They have excellent buses. Most of the first-class buses have Wi-Fi. You get snack bags. Some of them will have like attendants, like flight attendants that would, give you drinks throughout the trip, just depending on how much money you want to spend. And then they have cheaper buses. Huh? Yeah, they have movies every hour. They put a different movie. So, I mean, they have all different types of buses, and of course you can fly. They have, most cities have airports. So, does that answer your question, or? Okay, yeah, but there will be a lot to see, though.
Do you have to worry about the water much?
I never really had any problem drinking. I mean, you would not drink water out of the spigot, though, out of the sink or anything. You would always drink purified water. Most of the restaurants, there's a way to tell if the water's been purified. By the way, if they got like a circle inside of it, you could tell, like, the ice cubes. If you look at the ice cube, if it's got a circle inside of it, they say that's the safe ice to drink, and we never had any major problem. They always restaurants are going to use purified water anyways, because if they make customers sick, well, they go out of business, So the water's just always drink purified water. There's bottled water everywhere. I ate street food. Everyone says, don't eat the street food. I ate street food, and, well, for the most, you always go where there's a crowd. If you see a vending guy selling tacos or, whatever on the street, if there's a crowd of people, it's pretty much, people know who whose tacos are clean. If it's not clean, everyone's going to know. Rumors are going to spread, and the guy's not going to be able to sell tacos anymore. So, you just always go by how big of a crowd there is. If the restaurant's empty, it's probably not a very good restaurant. If it's got a lot of people in it, it's pretty safe to eat there. So, any more questions, or yes?
You said one place you stayed was only about $10. So how much did you end up spending on your trip overall?
Well, 2 people, including the tequila. There is a town called Tequila, and it's in the state of Jalisco, and all the tequila in the world is made in tequila. And if it's not made in tequila, it can't be called tequila. Yeah. I think we paid maybe $4,000. We lived pretty extravagantly down there, so. Yeah, for both of us. For 42 days, so. But it's all, you can spend as much or as little as you want. If you want to stay at hostels, every city's got hostels. You're going to pay around $6, $8, $9 a bed. Depending on the city, like Mexico City, Mexico City is probably the most expensive place we went. Our hotel, the cheapest we could find was $60. I'm sure they're cheaper though, but we stayed in sort of a nicer areas. So we were paying $60 a day, but we ended up staying only 4 days in Mexico City. But
Feel safe as you travel?
I felt safer in Mexico than I felt in many other countries I'd ever been. I felt safer in Mexico than I felt in being in Europe, going to Italy, going to Spain. So most people that you talk to, other tourists to, have the same response, that I felt the same. It's very safe. Yeah, oh yeah. I spent a lot of time in like countries like Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, and those are relatively safe, but you don't feel anything. I mean, Mexico, you feel so much safer in Mexico than you would in Colombia. So, and we would, wander around Mexico City sometimes at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, but we were lucky, but you don't go down any dark alleys. You stay in the main section of town, where you see other people. If it's a quiet, you just don't, you stay, Mexico City is so big, there's always so many people walking about at night anyways. You just stay in the brightly lit areas and just be careful, and you're probably, more than likely you'll be safe, just use a little bit of level of common sense.
Do you think it's changed in the last few years as far as safety?
I think things have gotten a lot more dangerous, especially in the border area. There's a lot more violence toward the Mexicans themselves. There is some violence reported to tourists, but you have to realize, statistics speaking, Mexico gets like 1 million to 2 million Americans visiting it a year, and maybe I'm trying to think of the actual statistics though, but it's very, very low, the amount of, compared to the amount of visitors visiting America. You're more likely to have experience with crime here in the United States. Like, can you imagine walking the streets of Greensboro at night by yourself? I would not do that, but I would walk down the streets of most cities in Mexico at night without any fear. So. Yeah, Mexico is much, much, much safer than what most people would think.